and welcome to episode 33 of That 60s Recording Podcast, the podcast that has conversations inspired by the golden era of recording. I hope that you have all had a lovely week. This week I'm continuing my conversation with EveAnna Manley of Manley Laboratories. Once again, just a fantastic woman, and I really hope that you're enjoying this conversation. I should tell you before we begin that my isolated drum stems that I send out every week, which are the Beatles isolated drums. So I re-record tracks that Ringo has, well, not just Ringo, but re-record Beatles drums tracks, essentially, just for fun. And you can see them all on my website, allyouneedisdrums.com. And the isolated drums that I'm sending out this week are I Want to Hold Your Hand. One of my favourite ones. I absolutely don't know why I haven't got around to it yet. So that's what's coming out on Tuesday morning. So if you're listening to this podcast and haven't signed up to the mailing list, you can do that on my website. And also that will be live on my website, so you can just go and look there. And that's it. So here we go. Going to dive straight into part 2 of my conversation with EveAnna Manley. Here we go. So then you took over sort of sole control of the company in 93, is that right? Or 96?
93 is when we divided Manley apart from VTL and moved into the building where we're still at now. And then David, he was an alcoholic and he was dry for a couple of years, and then he got back on the sauce, and then he took off in 96 and moved to France. And then we, in the course of the divorce, we'd split up everything, and I bought him out of Manley Labs, and also, helped him just sell off all the stuff he had acquired in the States. He just didn't want to be here anymore. And pulled another geographical and went to another continent, as he was prone to do throughout his life. So, yeah. Anyway, that's how that all happened.
But business-wise, for you, was that sort of freeing, then suddenly being able to sort of...
I had to first balance out the emotional parts, because I was really hurt and devastated. Yeah. And I still had a lot to learn about myself later on as well. But it was hard. But the story I tell is, I was kind of, after I got over the emotional hurt of it all, and then I started getting angry, and then I used that emotion, that anger, to drive me to work and to excel. And it was kind of like a revenge through success motivation. Like, I'll show you. You want to leave here? We're going to kick ass. We're going to have awesome products. These things are going to be amazing. They're going to be better than anything you ever did. Ha ha ha. That was like that was the voice in my head. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that's what spurred me on to come out with these pretty outrageous projects like the Voxbox. That was my first pro audio solo project after he left, and it was
cool.
It was kind of like a greatest hits package, but each section had enhancements over the standalone products. So it's like, yeah, I'll take what you started and make them better. and then the Stingray amplifier was my first hi-fi design, and also, importantly, though, we had a good team at the factory. We all worked together on aspects of the design, like new transformer designs and layouts, and listening to this. And Paul gave us a new driver circuit to try, that kind of thing. So we did. It was a team effort, definitely. I don't want to take all the credit there.
Did you
definitely
set your sights on specific pieces of gear that you wanted to create? What was your sort of in your mind's eye? In your mind's eye, what were you aiming for? So you made this the Voxbox, which is, as you say, a greatest hits of lots of things in one unit. But then, did you have a plan of what you kind of wanted to put out further down the line, or were you just focusing on one project at a time?
Well, yeah, the Voxbox, I saw the successes 737 was enjoying, and then Focusrite had come out with a voice box in their platinum range. And I'm like, well, they missed a good rhyming opportunity here. I'm going to make a combo unit called the Voxbox. And then, we needed a big badass EQ to go with it, and we had the big badass variable mu, so those those important pro audio building blocks. We had to nail that stuff down, but things came out as they came out.
Yeah. And you managed through all of it. Everything's handmade in California or hand assembled in California, and I'm really interested in the what issues are there in retaining in a company that retains sort of handmade stature, if you like. That there must be so many complications in terms of your margins, having to pay higher prices for your employees.
You can't even imagine them
Yeah.
all. All of them. In fact, after this podcast, I'm going to get back down into solving the problems of the day. As I say, manufacturing is, you will never be bored. There is something popping up every day. There is a new surprise every day. That no clean flux, you might need to actually clean it. It's just everything can come and bite you in the ass. A part that you've been using for 20 years might suddenly start blowing up every day. It's like, okay, we got to go find another vendor. Or, somebody made the cables wrong and there's 200 cables that are missing something, whatever. Every day is an adventure. And we are talking about human beings building this gear, and humans are definitely not perfect, and there are issues every single day. Most people understand that, and sometimes we definitely stretch our customers' patience. I can admit that, and we ask for continued patience because sometimes things happen, and we just have to scramble and solve the problems. And there you go. But I've seen like people, kind of put us up on this high pedestal, and I know our stuff is expensive, but it's like, man, robots are not making this gear. People are, and sometimes there are issues, and the best thing we could do is solve them quickly. So I'll be humble and declare openly that we are not perfect, but we sure strive to be. And with electronics, it demands perfection. Like if there's one resistor that's the wrong value or one thing that wasn't screwed in all the way or whatever, it's a problem, and the whole thing can fail because of one little problem. So we strive for perfection, and our error rate is probably around 1%. It's pretty good for manufacturing.
Very good,
I'd say. We pay close attention to the service records and what's happening after the units ship out and for how long, because we've got over 30 years of gear out there, and see what fails and what holds up. And we use all that to continually improve every day. Every day there's something to learn. And mistakes are there not to chastise people or to, they're there to learn from and to continue to improve. So it's that kind of feedback we really do need to keep getting better and better all the time.
Something we talk about a lot on this podcast is, with regards to recording, is less of a specifically a gear orientated thing, although it kind of is in a way, but it's a mentality towards recording and putting things on the tape or in the computer or whatever you're doing, but in a way that you don't necessarily have to edit it all the time or do 10,000 takes or use 1,000 plugins or this kind of stuff. And it strikes me that your attitude towards running the company and the way the company runs is that same equivalent, but in manufacturing gear. And I love that. I love that in the day of when valve technology was popular, tube technology was popular, things will have been hand assembled exactly like that. And that's part of the reason why that gear is so special and nostalgic. Obviously not the main reason, but it's part of that reason, and that you've managed to bring that along with your journey. And I think that's a huge part of the reason why what you make is really special. And
it's kind of like in business. Like I've never been driven by I want to get rich, or I've got a board of directors to satisfy, or we need to make the books look awesome, or we need to show all this profit or stuff like that. Those, okay, to pull it in, empirically, that's like having meters, and that's like recording with your eyeballs, watching the meters instead of listening. It's like using the wrong senses. So for me, the success for me is like, lowering that error rate, or, being more perfect with the gear, or designing new stuff, or selling a bunch of these things, and everyone loves them. Like more organic measures of success, not just the bottom line in the books. You know what I'm
Yes.
saying? So, and I've seen that also, that shift from when I first started 32 years ago. You know, there wasn't Pro Tools. People were recording to 24 track tape, and um, you know, people were not looking at computer screens. They might see a needle bouncing, but you've got to sit there and listen to it. And so these days, because people record with their eyeballs so much, looking at the screens, and then they'll call us like, "Hey, this level on that thing's a half dB louder than that channel." It's like, okay, well, just hit the knob a little bit, just blow on it. Okay, there's your half dB. And it's, see, they do that because they're looking at it. And but if people were actually recording with their ears and not watching the knob marking, or not watching the computer screen, if they could have heard that half dB discrepancy, they would have just turned the knob
Yeah.
a little bit, right? So there's been a shift on how people record.
I think you're right.
It's made us tighten up, but then it's also creates unrealistic expectations. It's like, hey, this is organic analog equipment. Every resistor, every capacitor, every choke has a tolerance. Sometimes that potentiometer might have a 20% tolerance range. Yeah. So we have to go through and match them so that you will have a fairly equal balance on both channels on that function, say. In the computer, of course, it's an equation, and it's always perfect, and they don't calculate imbalances into it. They don't insert the tolerance. The tolerance is like 0, where we're working with 1% to sometimes 20% tolerance with the parts. But it's those kind of imperfections that can be, human in linking. I mean, go listen to Beatles records, and you'll hear a slight guitar clam, or a vocal come in early or something. And we've all memorized those little bits in the songs, but they make them human, Or go listen. There was a video I was watching on YouTube where they took Steve Perry from Journey and they auto-tuned his vocals. And it's shocking. It's like, leave him alone. Holy cow, how horrible. I sent him that link, and he was just terrified, mortified. It's like, that's horrible. And also he pointed out that they said there was something with the guitars. He's like, that's not even a guitar, it's a keyboard.
Love it. It's incredible.
Oh my goodness. Anyway, yeah. Let's remember that we're all humans and embrace that.
I had an interesting conversation with somebody recently, and it was this sort of thing came up. And I remember doing some recording, years ago now, 12, 13 years ago. And we were talking about a guitar that was out of tune, or the melody line of the song that was out of tune, that was played on a synth maybe, and it would deliberately been out of tune. And I think there's been research into things being out of tune, and the human beings are naturally drawn to things that are wrong, because we can sort of fix them, and in our heads, not physically fix them, but our minds can fix them, and it also makes things a bit more human, and that's why we actually like things not being perfect, because that shows that it's like us. And that's why we're drawn to it. And
it gives us work to do.
Yes, exactly.
Got to fix all the imperfections. Absolutely. That's awesome. I mean, and then link back to 60 songs too. It's like, people are, it's like they'd be struggling over, maybe there's a half dB discrepancy or something.
Sorry,
And
that
it's
light is
like,
so bright. I don't know how
yeah,
to. I'm gonna have to move into the way of it.
it's like, dude, give me a song with a good hook.
Oh well,
you
yeah.
know, you know, nobody cares about this half dB discrepancy. Let's hear that awesome song that I want to play again and again.
Exactly, precisely.
Sorry.
No, you're absolutely right, and I just find it really interesting the way that the company runs and that attitude. I mean, personally, I feel that that's what the world needs more of. And then we're sort of moving into a slightly different territory here, but that's what people need to. People, I think we should start paying more for things and appreciating things value more and doing, not cheaper is not better, and we need to for me it goes down to things like food and all that kind of stuff. But anyway, I'm moving on to moving into my sort of politics here, but it doesn't matter. So one of the things I wanted to get you to speak about, if you wouldn't mind, is a lot of the interviews that you give, you speak so eloquently about electronics and with such passion. And I know there will be younger listeners, and me included, who are new to a lot of this world. Could you explain how a valve works? But hearing it from somebody like you, I think it would be extra special. So I'd love you to just describe your understanding of the inner workings of a
Oh,
tube.
thanks. Well, I found it kind of hard to grasp some of these electronic concepts, early on. I mean, Ohm's law, I can get that. I can, write the equations and solve those easy things, and some of the more obscure things, like you can't see and you have to kind of visualize it, they were hard for me to grab initially, definitely. But don't give up. When you, it depends like how you learn about it too. I was trying to learn. I was trying to read books and learn about these things early on in my career, and I found it very hard to get into my head. Actually, um, vacuum tubes are an amplifying device. The simplest form would be a bonode. That would be a light bulb. Okay, it has a heat of we would call a heater. It has an element, and you run a current through it, and it produces light and heat. So a vacuum tube has one of those things in it called a filament, and it's jammed inside a metal tube that's called the cathode. So the very center of the tube is the filament, and then you have concentrically coming out, you've got a cathode, and its job is to expel electrons and make them fly away. And they're going to fly away to another thing that's outside called an anode, a plate. So that would be the most simple vacuum tube with two elements. We're not going to count the filament. We're going to just count the cathode and the anode. That would be a diode. So in its simplest form, you can make a vacuum tube diode that's transmitting current one way but not the other. And then you can use those in a power supply to change AC into DC, for instance. So, those are very early examples there. So DeForest and then Armstrong, DeForest put a thing in the middle between the cathode and the anode. He put a thing in the middle of it, which became what we call a grid, and it's fine wire wrapped on two posts like this. And it turns out that when you apply a voltage to that thing, you're controlling you're controlling the electron flow from the cathode to the anodes. So it's kind of like a regulator. It's kind of like a water valve, and that's why British people call them valves, called vacuum tubes valves. So that's how we change like how much we're going to amplify from. So we're going to modulate that grid with the music, and we'll have a bigger amplitude of that music coming off the anode, for instance. So that's in a nutshell like how it's physically functioning. And And there you go. Building vacuum tubes. I've been to 2 vacuum tube factories in my life, and they're very complicated endeavors. You've got to know a lot about a lot of different disciplines to build a vacuum tube, and they're also very labor intensive to put together. You have to use your hands and physically insert that little wire into that little tube, and then do some little micro spot welding and all this kind of thing. So it's not for the faint of heart, and it's expensive, and it's really difficult.
What?
That's how tubes sort of work.
Thank you. What if I don't know if it's a matter of opinion or physics, but what makes one tube better than another? So when you're perhaps deciding what tubes you're going to put in your products, what informs those decisions?
Yeah, well, practically speaking, what tubes can I purchase? Thousands of. That's one thing, because tubes are only being made in Russia, China, and the Czech Republic for the most part. I mean, there aren't that many factories on the planet making vacuum tubes. So in the past, sometimes we've obtained, lots of 20,000 pieces of that new old stock, tube, and then we'll design some circuits around that because we have a ton of them. And then other times those have run out, or there's real dregs out there, so we have to design around currently produced tubes that are good and reliable and quiet and all that. But yeah, the best tube is the quiet one that's not making noise, that is going to last for a long time, that you can buy lots of.
Yeah. That's really interesting. I'd never thought that so few companies would be making them. And is it increasing with sort of tube popularity increasing? No. Oh, right.
No, but we're lucky it's staying the same for now.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What's sort of next? I know that I was interested in, obviously you have a relationship with Universal Audio, and they've done the plug-in things, which is that's how I first came across Manley as a company was through plugins, and that's, although that kind of goes against what you're doing in terms of physical gear, it's also a good way of introducing people to sort of the work, how analog gear works in a sort of easy
You got
way.
it. Yep. The plugins for us at first, of course, we had the typical fear of plug-in sales cannibalizing hardware sales, but after we got going with Universal Audio, we found quite the opposite. So for a retail price of $300 for a massive passive, and you can run it 9 times or whatever, 9 instances. I mean, it started serving as the demonstration model or the entry level model in our product line. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I started seeing fewer of those questions like, hey, what's the best setting for vocals? It's like, don't ask me, go turn the knobs.
Yeah.
They already turned the knobs in the plugin, so they figured it out. You know what I mean? And that's still my answer. Don't ask me. I am not a recording engineer. You are. You can turn those knobs. That was a telemarketer dialing my phone. Sorry, got interrupted there.
No, all good.
Yeah, so I encourage everyone to not ask me where to put the knobs. You've got the unit in front of you. You've got a mic in front of your musician. Just turn the knobs. You will not blow anything up. Fire will not erupt. The earth will not open up beneath your studio. Just turn the knobs and find sound that works for you.
Is that generally true that the more that the more plug-in versions of things have become accessible, that you've seen sales have grown because people are suddenly being exposed to things they didn't realize were good, and they go, oh wow, if the plug-in's good, then the actual unit must be absolutely brilliant. Right.
Well, for one thing, like if you're doing high-res audio and you're required to retain all the information up over into the stratosphere, then you might want to be using analog equipment, because we're not going to chop off everything above 22K or whatever. So, so that's one thing. But no, people say that it's probably about 10%, 12% improvement to get the hardware. And it costs a lot more money, but that's the law of diminishing returns is, that's the way it goes.
Oh, well, yeah, absolutely. I mean, you're paying.
So,
yeah, it's clear that anybody who has started their outboard gear collection knows knows the sort of the risks that they're taking with it, but also the benefits. It's the small percentages that add up to make the great sounds.
But it's real. It is a real change. That last 12% is very important for sure, especially in the high frequency, and then also just the depth and the phase information that if you can keep that stuff intact as long as you can through the recording process, it probably does play a good role in making your stuff sound good.
Yeah, it certainly does, and it also, I think, plays into the the physicality of having a physical of having a product in front of you or something in front of you to twist. It means that your mentality towards using it is different than a plugin. You have to commit, for instance, and you have to make decisions, and that's often
and you might retain a little bit of imperfection somewhere, and that's what humanizes it.
But exactly, absolutely.
Yep.
So where do you see the next things happening? I mean, I've noticed that you guys haven't got any 500 series equipment at all, which is clearly a decision that you guys have made. What's the, there's all these trends happening in the audio world right now. What are you just sticking to your guns, making the?
I've always been sticking to my guns, dude.
Yeah.
So 500 series, everyone's screaming for that. What we did instead was I enlisted Bruno Putzis to design us this awesome modern switch mode high voltage power supply, and we call that Manley Power, circle R, and we're busy getting that power supply into retro engineering it into our older designs. Okay. It doesn't mean it's retrofittable.
Yes.
Without a lot of work and mods, so we're not offering retrofitting of it, but the newest models are driven by Manley Power. So we did the microphones and the Massive Passive last year, so all 3 of our mics and the Massivo have Manley Power on them these days, and the benefits of that power supply is just bigger, cleaner, faster, sounds awesome, works all over the world. You don't have to reconfigure voltages. You just plug it in anywhere. And, for us manufacturing, we can keep one product in stock, not, 240 volts, 220 volts, 120, 100 volt, so it simplifies our lives as well. And some people don't really think about voltage changes anymore because you just take your USB charger and plug it in anywhere, like you don't think about it, right? So there were a lot of instances where people would travel from the United States to Europe and plug in their mic and it blew up. Oh my God. It's like, well, yeah, it was set at 120. You have to reset it for 220. And the new power supply, you don't have to mess with any of that. It's auto sensing and it just works everywhere. So that's good news. So see, that's where I put my focus was, definitely on what is weakest about the 500 series platform, especially for vacuum tubes.
Yes.
I don't want to hear about your plus and minus 15 or 18 or whatever. I can't properly run a vacuum tube off of that. and then, bang for the buck with my Manley Force, that's 4 mic pre's and 1 channel and 1 chassis, with Manley Power, and it's $2,500. So what's that? $600 something a channel. I could not even do that in 500 series.
No.
If I were, you know what I mean? So we can bring out cost-effective stuff that competes dollar-wise per channel, but has a proper power supply and sounds awesome and has headroom for days. So that's my answer to that.
I mean, that's an incredible answer. It's a yeah.
Just gonna do it better, and price out about the same anyway. So
So the one thing I did want to ask you about was the design and names of the products. I love the fact that have products that are obviously based on sort of legacy products like the Poltec EQ and things like that, but you've redesigned the sort of front plates in a way that is completely Manley, and it's all there's a few sort of there's definitely a sense of humor in the way that some of them are named and the way that they look. I struggled to think. I was sat the other day looking through the website and I was just thinking I can't think of another company that has such a unique looking range of products that is that doesn't look based on anything else. Everything has some sort of like, oh, that looks a little bit like that other thing, or that preamp looks like this preamp. Yours don't. They just look like Manley products.
Thanks. I think that's a really important lesson in branding that I had forgotten at one point, actually. And one of our designers was trying to make like a new range within a range. But then you look across the room and you can't tell that is a Manley product. You know what I mean? The thing that David did was that the Manley blue, we call it Manley blue. It's a pewter gray. It's the anodized color. It's this kind of blue, purpley gray color. And then the black insert that was engraved. So you had a high contrast between the silver engraving and the black faceplate, and then the black inlaid insert into the gray panel was with the stainless steel cap head screws. It's just a chunky, cool look. And so when I took over, I was like, well, we've got a CNC machine and all capabilities here. We don't have to stick to rectangles anymore. So the Voxbox, that's where I created the triangles and the ovals or the D-shaped things, and made a big ass statement and put it in a 3U box, this big, huge thing to make a statement, beautiful machining. But also it's not just a pretty face. It actually, all those groupings help organize the knobs. So, it really helps your workflow. Like you go right for the knob you need.
Mm-hmm.
And you're not, I've seen products where, say it's a combo unit and there's like 30 knobs across it and you're like Battleship D5, okay, that's the attack control. It's hard you have to relearn and, you have to count knobs to get to where you're trying to get to. So that's why I started doing these shapes, grouping the sections of products so that it really helps you ergonomically as well. I think it does.
Well, yeah. It's so elegant that it's sort of balancing how am I trying to say? I don't know the word I'm looking for, but what you make is almost timeless. With it's the technology of it is back to the roots of recording, but then you've somehow managed to put your own stamp on it and bring it into the modern era in such an elegant way. And I think that's it's really, really commendable.
Thanks.
I think
it was just having access initially. There was a machine shop next door to us at the first VTL factory, which we ended up acquiring. We bought it, and working so closely with the machinists there enabled us to explore some, advanced for audio gear machining. Not advanced as far as machining goes, but that look that David and Gary developed initially, I thought it was really cool looking. And it's important to keep that method going on and just expand on the shapes and so on. And then other things with like dressing the meters a little nicer. Like David used to initially, he always face mounted the meters. And then it's like, nah, people like it when you dress the meters up and, maybe machine some bezels around it or make a unique looking window or something like that. That makes the unit very, physically attractive to people. So,
oh yeah, definitely.
So we've moved to back mount meters and made the windows look different. And then the cool thing in that Manley New Mu, I love doing that. So we ordered some reverse wound meters so we could do 2 meters facing up like this.
Yes.
And actually it makes it so easy to read because the needles are, right next to each other, and you're not like looking across the faceplate at left versus right. Oh, I missed it,
Yeah.
So it's cool.
That's the as you were talking before you brought it up, that's the faceplate I had in my head was that New Mu compressor, where I was thinking exactly that. I was going to ask you about it next. So I'm glad you
Yeah,
brought it up.
it's a cool design.
It's
but
very
yeah,
cool.
that's what we like doing, is just exploring, taking that method and then just making new creative shapes and so on. But oftentimes they'll start with me just sketching something on a piece of paper. Definitely.
Oh, cool. So finally, this is something I ask everybody: is if I guess it's 2 questions within 1 question. So if there, firstly, is somebody looking to get into, if someone's listening to this and is hearing about the inner workings of gear for the first time, what would your advice be about exploring the sort of electronic world from a beginner? Is it reading books, or is it soldering cables, or building guitar pedals, or what would you say are the good first steps for
Lots of those things. I mean, for me, like I said, I had a hard time absorbing information from books by the time I got out of college. I was just like, been in school all my life, and I was having a hard time getting through electronics books and really understanding why it was working, and also I've noted a link between my own anxiety, or I mean, you could call it ADD, and I think it's not ADD. I think it's more anxiety issues, and how that if I'm having like an anxious time emotionally, like I'm worried about a lot of stuff, or waking up worrying about things, I have a really hard time absorbing new information in those states. So I've got to get my mind calm and happy and not worrying about too much stuff to be able to learn. So that's one thing I've noted. Earlier this year, I got onto, that University of YouTube. And I started following some makers, like just like machinists, where they'd just be machining things and learning more about machining. And also this guy teaching an Arduino class. And
cool.
I know my way around some computer coding, not on a super high level, but I know my way around some things. And I was able to really get it, man, just watching his tutorials and following along and doing the exercises. And that guy was a math teacher, so everything really made a lot of sense from my math studies, and making those equations and then writing the code to go along, and all that controllability. And I learned a lot about electronics just going through that exercise, and buying, a $35 kit off of Amazon to kind of follow along and make the code, and then make that motor spin backwards and whatever. But all that kind of controllability and GUI stuff, we're actually working on a lot of that stuff
cool.
in our hi-fi preamp designs right now, and making everything controllable from afar. So all the switchings on relays, all the input are on encoders. So we're sending a pulse. Everything's being controlled by a massive serial bus, basically. So from that, we can control them with apps and things like that. So as far as learning goes, I think that today there's so much information available on the internet, and lynda.com, or whatever they're called now, and then all these YouTube tutorials. You can learn so much, and for me, it was a lot easier to absorb the information that way. And then to just get a gig, like I did, I started at the bottommost rung at the factory, just learning how to solder. I was working with a bunch of Mexicans who didn't even speak English at the time. And I'm like, shit, I should have taken Spanish. I took French. Nerd. I can't talk with these guys. I went back and took Spanish, so I could converse. But which brings me to another thing. Just communication skills in general are so important to be in any kind of working world. Communication, ability to learn, ability to assess yourself and figure things out, and admit when you don't know something. That's really important too. And it's something I learned in my 20s. I didn't come into the business with that, but it's okay to say, hey, no, I don't understand that, or no, I don't know that. Can you explain it to me? Or give me a minute, let me go figure that out. It's okay. So I think my advice to young people is to really start humble, be grateful for that entry-level job. I see a lot of people like, oh, I need $100,000. It's like, nope, not for this job. Sorry. Some people are like really desperate to just start earning money, and you might miss out on the steps it takes to really acquire the knowledge.
Yeah, that's brilliant. Thank you. Something I sort of noted about your approach to things is obviously it's confident, but it's egoless. There seems to be no ego attached to the way that you approach things, and
I hope so.
Yeah, your willingness to learn and listen, and it just seems, and it's sort of it's exactly what you've just said essentially. So I think that shows it. So yeah. It's been amazing. Thank you so much for speaking with me.
Thank you, Joe.
I have no
gotta
more
jump
questions.
to my factory ops meeting right now. I'm 7 minutes late.
Oh goodness, I'm sorry.
Wanted to get through this uninterrupted anyway.
Yeah, no, I appreciate it. Thank you so much.
Cool. It's been a real pleasure. Thank you so much.
So there we have it, EveAnna Manley from Manley Laboratories. And if you don't already, I would recommend going to check them out on Facebook, Instagram and all that kind of stuff. They're doing some really, really cool things. And I think that there's some more cool things coming in the pipeline. So that's it for this week. Next week, I am speaking with Alan Hyatt, which is a bit of an interesting episode. I have no doubt that you guys will not have heard of Alan Hyatt. Because if I'm honest, I hadn't either. But he came as a recommendation from a friend, and he is part of the distribution network of audio equipment. So he owns the company, the parent company of Toft Audio and Trident Desks and Joe Meek products, among other things. And it's a really fascinating insight into the way that side of the industry works. It's not a side of the industry that we get to hear about very often. And as a sort of moderately plummy UK person, he's the antithesis. He's a proper New Yorker, and he's got some great talk. So it was a really fun episode, and it sort of goes along with the how would you say? It goes along with my penchant for wanting to move away occasionally from the 60s side of things, just to understand a little bit more about the way that the audio industry works. However, it does link, because it kind of is part of Malcolm Toft's story, and it sort of opens up what happened with Toft Audio and Trident once that company had sort of moved on from Malcolm's control. I just found it a really interesting insight into the way that the industry works. So that's coming next week. That just leaves me to say, if you'd like to get in touch with me, you can do that on Instagram or Facebook at allyouneedisdrums. My email address is joe@allyouneedisdrums.com. If you'd like to support the podcast by buying a mug, you can do that at my website, allyouneedisdrums.com. There's a link to the shop there. And please do that, because it would be really appreciated. Thank you. Big thanks to Joe Kane for the intro and outro music he supplies, and my good friend David Henshaw for the artwork that he supplies. And I will see you next week. Goodbye.